Yeah, this is like 90% of the stuff I've been talking to people about. All right.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, started off, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about more about communication styles or communication aspects related to coaching to athletes and, ultimately what the athletes should be telling us. And that's, I'll preface by saying this, that not all athletes know exactly what we're trying to get from them in terms of information. And that's okay because they're still learning. Like the ones that are very self-aware and can pick up on trends, right? It makes our job a lot easier to make adjustments. Um, but a lot of lifters don't know what we mean when we ask certain questions, right? So being able to explain that and getting that information out the door quicker when you're taking on an athlete or working with an athlete so that you can get the appropriate feedback. And even then, they still may not completely understand it because everybody has different goals and interpretations of what training should look like for them. Some are there to, have fun and get strong, and there's not a whole lot of like, you know, um, introspect or intuition with training or awareness of training. They just kind of go to the gym and they do their job and then they go home. And that's pretty much it. And they're going to be a little bit more work to figure out, or they could be really easy and they do a great job. Like I've got lifters or I've had lifters that do that where they just go and punch the clock and you could pretty much write anything and they're going to progress, right? Because it's just they've maybe it's removed expectations and things like that that can definitely hinder someone's performances because they expect certain things or they come in with the very pressured mindset, self-pressured mindset um that makes it hard for us to sift through the actual information and get them better. Um but yeah, not all athletes know what that is. And so I'll kind of start by saying, kind of before we get into the communication aspect, but um, there's certain things that I look for when it comes to coaching. The key words I think we're all referring to are like, what strong feels like, what recovered feels like, what fatigued feels like, what lacking pop means, feeling flat, it's a bodybuilding term, but feeling flat is another great way of, feeling, detrained in essence, or, just not having the rhythm. Then there's out of practice, right? Um, and so we can kind of start combining some of these things and being able to assess what is going on with the lifter. Um, strong but not recovered, or sorry, back that up. Recovered but not strong. Tend to lean towards intensity issues, right? They're not coming in adapted and ready. Um, there is, I would say, a detraining effect in it. I would look at that. Maybe I kind of tend to bias a little bit more in terms of intensity first when I hear that. When I hear someone say they're lacking pop in their squat or in their bench, or even somebody that's highly efficient in a deadlift where they're just not getting that pop off the floor, I might look towards volume. And I'm not saying like, your top sets need to change, right? I'm saying more so from their back down work. Maybe it needs to be a little lighter and a little bit snappier to kind of find that rhythm. And maybe they need to tack on an extra set or something like that. Because if they're doing, 65, 70% of their 1RM, I mean, I'm not knowing anyone, I don't know many that are going to go like, you know, a 3x8 might be the top end type of volume for that type of work. Um, it might be less than that, but nonetheless, so lacking pop for me is I kind of lean towards volume on that one. Um, and what that feels like is it feels like you feel good, you feel ready, bar feels good on your back. It's like clunky, right? Where they just can't get this like rebound rhythm type feel. That also might not be a programming change in the sense of it. It could also be a warm up issue. I've found that to be true. Um, Not all lifters, sometimes we have spaced things out, right, for higher frequency, or, depending on frequency, we might space a squat and a deadlift or squat sessions apart like 72 hours. If they're doing 3 times a week, maybe it's 48. occasionally the 96, right? And they might benefit from like ascending work because they get the practice before they get to the top set. Whereas that's a big issue, I think, for a lot of lifters now is that they see these big jumps and they go, "Oh, I got a big jump into my top set. I only did 2 warm-ups." Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they like it looks like, hard, right? Now it works for certain individuals, right? Marcellus does it, and he thrives on that, and because he gets taxed from it, hence why he gets 3 times a week squatting, and he gets more rep work to kind of get his rhythm going into that session, right? So you can play it one way or the other, but if the lifter is, always doing that in a sense of like, and they're only squatting twice a week, I would sometimes take a venture to say that they're probably the back down start to feel a lot better, right? It all depends on what the athlete feels and what works well for them. Like I said, Marcellus is an exception to the rule where, three warm-ups and he's good to go. Whereas I've had lifters, they're like, "Oh, I did 3 warm-ups," and they're like, it feels off, but on my second to last back down, I felt the best, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, how many reps did you get in there? How many did you get to that point? Then you can
Yeah.
take
Like,
the information and say, hey, look, maybe you need to do, instead of doing 5 warm-up reps, maybe you need to do 10 or 12 to get to that top set. And I'm not saying that you need to take smaller jumps, maybe, or maybe just do more reps with what you got.
that's one thing that Eric Bonhorn told me. He said that one of the biggest things with warm-ups that lifters forget is that that's like probably the easiest form of training volume that you can get in. That will help out a little bit with your adaptation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and at the end of the day, like, you're going to go to a competition and some of the variables almost tend to fade away. Like maybe you don't do as many reps on the warm-ups on a competition platform or in the warm-up room. And, in essence, like, you don't, we're going to dive into the psychology of it because to me, it's like you're in your own little world in training, right? You have all of the variables under your control for the most part. And that is where lifters get inside their heads and inside the bubble of like making, um, it kind of like gets them stuck, right? Versus when they get into on the platform, they're in that warm up room, they just kind of go into that like flow state, right? They can make decisions at home. They can make decisions. They can make changes on the fly with, in essence, no real recourse, right? Maybe their session doesn't go as well as they want, but there's another one. There's always another one, right? Whereas for competition, they kind of like, you can't do that. You can't sit there and worry about your stance or things like that or how many warm up. Like you just got to do the job, right? And if something doesn't come out right, then yeah, obviously make changes. Again, coming back to the idea of feedback, right? You're always. I'll back up and say that you really can't change what happens in that moment. Everything you do leading up to that moment is what affects it, right? How many warm up reps? How did your sleep go? How did your nutrition go? How did all these things? How did your training variables go? Right? In that moment, you doing something may not necessarily make it better or worse. You worrying about it, you focusing on a certain thing doesn't inherently make it's going to move better. You're not going to know until you're done. And I'll talk about that with like movement stuff because that kind of dives into that realm of like what movement really should be, right? And it's, we talked about it in the other podcast videos with Steve. Like, movement is like 99% setup and 1% execution. And I'll break that down into another way of saying it is like basically it's like you have feedback in your setup, right? Is this right or not? Can I change it? Yes. Okay, cool. I don't like my toe angle. I want to change that. Right. Tweak it. Okay, I'll toe it out a little bit more. Oh, I don't like where my hands are. I'm gonna kind of tighten it up a little bit, whatever. At a certain point, that all fades away and you're just gonna squat. You're just gonna
Right.
bench. You're just gonna deadlift. So at a certain point, it stops. And like that's the idea is that if you can take that and look at the variables leading into things, then you can make your adjustments and understand why something didn't work or did work for that matter.
Yeah, with that, like, I think that's a really great way to put it. The setup is really everything because you are going to get that feedback when you are lifting. Like, was that the proper setup? One of the biggest errors I see people do on squats, like right now, is they rush their walkout. They don't let the bar settle, and they kind of don't think that's a very important part. But I always like tell people that walkout sets the tone for the squat. If you set up with your feet like too narrow too, it's like you're less stable. You have way more like room for error.
Yeah.
With a deadlift, if you're setting up, and one of the biggest things for me is like if I see like myself or my lifters, are they fiddling around like with their feet, like if they're doing like a rep set because like it felt kind of off on their first rep, and then kind of creating a system where it's like, okay, well, this is where my feet need to be. This is what it feels like, especially on a sumo deadlift. And I think Steve had a really good point with Natalie on powerlifting now, where he said like one of the cues that he had her use was like spreading the floor as like she was like going down and creating that tension kind
Mhm.
of prior to the deadlift. And I think that's like a great way to conceptualize it, because the hardest part about deadlift is that lack of eccentric, and you're not really able to feel out your hip position very well. But that's one way you can actually really well create that tension in your hips and your hamstrings as you're approaching the bar. And the
Oh,
biggest thing like
absolutely.
with bench press is just making sure that you are setting up in a way where you can actually maintain that back of neck pressure, so you can have your chest as high a position as possible and have that constant leg drive, in my opinion. Because if those two things are there, it's pretty hard to mess it up.
Absolutely. And I'll piggyback because it's actually funny. I'm doing a video for powerlifting now, specifically on the deadlift. And there are, I think, are great times and places for building tension into the fact that we don't have an eccentric really. I will also say that some people can take that too far. A lot of people I tend to find, or not a lot, but I'm finding a lot more cases where an individual will tension themselves really hard going down to a deadlift, and then they go to wedge and they have no pliability to the bar, none. So what you're going to see are early knee locks and basically a lot of low back like rip through, like kind of pull back, almost to the point where they like like if we see somebody with like an early knee lock and they're still way out over the bar,
Yeah.
right? And their hips are stuck, and then they have to kind of pull that weight back into the lockout, and it's basically just compressing their lower back even more. Or you'll find that they go to wedge and they scoop pretty hard because they can't get into position because they've already tensioned themselves up. So you can take yourself into you take yourself into an end range position and then try to expect more out of that end range position when you're trying to lift. It doesn't work. Um, so being mindful of how much tension we actually need is imperative. I've had a few calls with people that were just they're trying to do these textbook positions, and you're like, okay, cool, their back looks great, they go to wedge into the bar, everything looks good on like by textbook standards, and then it's like this doesn't look good. Like it doesn't break well. There's not a lot of tension. You can tell that just it's a lot of upper body trying to fight the bar through. It's because they're stuck. They have nowhere to go. Right. So if you think like relative position, right, you can press your back and tighten it up to hold a perfect position as you go down the bar. Where can you go? You're already there. You might as well start it because you don't have there's no chance you can be dynamic with it. You're already there. And you're there really high in the range of motion. Right. So sometimes taking it to be more loose, basically, because again, you're only fighting gravity down to the bar. You're getting eccentric against gravity, right? So how much tension do you need to fight gravity? Not anything. Otherwise, we'd have to really, do funny things with tire shoes and stuff like that. So sometimes having, and like I said, the video breaks it all down, but sometimes having flexion in your hinge so that you can move into extension.
That is something that I realize with my deadlift. Like that's something that I need to have. Is if I don't have that, my body goes there anyways. That's all with this wasted movement, and then that's going to cause me to have, I'm going to waste that energy off to the floor. I'm that deadlifter who is going to miss at his knees because of that. Like, and like I think it's interesting because when we talk about like deadlift technique, like you will see most people like do need a degree of flexion in their upper back. Um, I don't think we talked much about like how much though it's okay to like have like your lower back even like flexed. Like I
Oh,
noticed
100%.
that especially for really like efficient sumo deadlifters, like or deadlifters just in general, like myself, that's just where I'm strongest in. And if I start there, it's like I can keep that position the entire way through. And people are too focused on that neutrality. And in reality, if you think about squats and deadlifts, like we are strongest when we have a small degree of just overall back flexion. The thing is, can we maintain that position off the floor or have very minimal breakdown?
Absolutely. And if we think about it too, like the deadlift, the deadlift in itself, right, is also subtly counterbalancing you. So what happened, like if we think about what happens on a cable row or anything like that, it's going to shift you back just to offset the weight, right? So if we're doing that in a deadlift too, like how much tension do you need in your back to be able to wedge into position, right? And then in turn, like you're going to get tight and compress and extend to move this weight off the floor at some point. But like you're going to have to start with the ability to do that, and also being able to create the space to actually feel that occur into the wedge is going to be from, whether it's a hip hike or, a hinge in wedge, or if it's a hip hike and, set up hip hike out of it and then wedge back in. Like, um, you know, they talk about like natural organization, right? That this exists, right? That's why I would say like you don't need to think about your knees and hips in a squat. You don't think everyone can visualize what a wedge looks like, right? Why the heck are we cueing it? We don't need to, because it's gonna happen naturally, right? All these lifters have been wedging and creating tension into the bar, unless they're like legitimately grip and rip, and they're not even using their legs, which I find hard to believe. At some level, you can visualize what that looks like. Let's like for a sumo example, right? Eric Lapointe does multiple, kind of practice little wedges before he actually does it. Everyone can visualize his deadlift. You see it, watch it, or just go to Instagram and watch his deadlift, right? It's it's a work of art, right? Being able to do that, and he's letting that happen naturally, right? And that's the ability. That's why he can obviously leverage his helping too, but that was what makes him a very, very strong deadlifter, right? And everyone could take that and go and apply it to their own training if they're doing sumo, right? And so he creates that space and then he wedges back in, right? So like we don't need to go and cue anything specific. You just take that visual image and run with it and emulate it and do it and just see what happens for you, right? For for each individual. Like I'm not gonna if I I use this example a lot, but if I'm gonna go and emulate Steph Curry's shot, I'm just gonna watch a video real quick and look at it and go, okay, cool, I'm gonna go to the court and try it. And then I'm gonna I might check it like, okay, cool, like what's the difference there? But like at the same time, I'm not Steph Curry, but I can emulate his motions and his actions and his because it has to be a dynamic action. And to me, a wedge is a dynamic action. You don't have the ability to fine tune it while you're doing that. You're supposed to be creating force, right? I'm not gonna, like I said, I backtrack. I'm not gonna worry about what my knees and hips are doing in a squat. I'm just gonna squat. Whatever happens, happens, right? Like my knees and hips are gonna break to squat. Go ask somebody in a general training facility. How do you do a bodyweight squat? Okay, cool. You're not gonna cue them. And you match the
So
demand. You match it with the demands of what they need, right?
what I'm hearing then is basically you like to have your lifters like instead of like thinking about all these different cues, just focus on
Right.
like videos and like then like what felt good, and then you
Yeah.
can kind of like look back and just see like this is like okay, well, based off of what you feel here, what I'm seeing here is maybe this is why that felt not very good. Maybe try this again, report back.
100%. I've watched people deadlift and they're like, first, I watch a set and you have like this aesthetic of like what a good deadlift looks like for somebody, right? And you go and look at it and like, first one looked okay, second one looked really good. But they're not, it's not like a touch and go. It's not like they're putting themselves in the great position. And they're putting it down, and you can tell that they're literally losing tension to do it. So we're gonna remove the idea that touch and go is gonna set you up for the next best, like a really good fine-tuned position, because you get the eccentric of the weight going down. That's gone, right? You see people how they drop it now. They
Mhm.
just kind of fold over and drop the damn thing. Okay. So if we're doing that and then you watch them and people are hip, let's say this is a hip hiking example, right? For let's say sumo. I've seen it to where I see the first one, I'm like, yeah, a little stuck, right? Knees lock early, kind of grindy to lock out. Second one looks a lot better. And then you look at it and you go, what's the difference? And you see the difference between their hip hike size. One is they're trying to hold their position for whatever reason. The first one, they're like trying to like hold their natural tendencies, right? Or, maybe holding this like flat back or whatever, mindset. And the second one, they don't care. And they just kind of like
Yep.
pop it up and you see them flex more, right? And they've created more space. They've allowed their backs to move into a position that's more conducive to them to create force. And they get a better position into the bar. And that's all I'll do is I'll take that and go, okay, cool, cool. Take that second rep and put it on the first one. Right. And a lot of times is them trying to force tension. They're hesitant, they're nervous, whatever, and they lock up versus like having multiple calls, like just, hey, just go down the bar. I don't care what it looks like. Just go grab the bar. And a lot of times they'll put themselves in a position that looks good, or looks more flex. And then they go to wedge in and they look great. And they have the pop off the floor that they're looking for. They have the position that they're looking for. And it works and it matches up to what they did that works well. And
Yeah, I
then
think
if
especially
you,
on like a deadlift, like when we're talking about like that feeling, like it is hard to like recreate. Like I've just found like even like I have like good deadlift leverages, like
yep,
especially like on a sumo, like it's hard to like always recreate that. But I really do think like what you said, it really mostly just comes down to overthinking. And that's where a lot of these inconsistencies come in, where you're just too focused on thinking about blah 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 instead of just like what feels good. Notice what goes well on your reps. Try to recreate that on like your warm-ups and like those right feelings and positions, and just understand it's going to take time and practice, and it's just not like one magic cue that's going to fix everything.
yeah, I mean, and yeah, exactly. So like, basically, what I teach now is more so just I want you to envision what you want out of it, right? Put it into something that you can confidently execute without worry of anything else, right? Because if you can't, right, it's like the downswing of a golf club. You don't care, right? If you want to hit the ball well, you're going to set up for it. You're going to create your position and turn, which is all again mostly things that you can have control over, and then you're just going to go. And if you know exactly how that's going to happen, then you're fine. It's when we cue, we induce anxiety and hesitancy out of a lifter more often than not,
Right.
right? So like it becomes a challenge to override that and let them, and then like more often than not, I'll find like, obviously there's a learning curve. It's like, use music as an example, right? Piano, whatever. And they're like, okay, cool. I think I got this. And they're kind of hesitant. And then as they go and go and go, they start to get it more and more. And that's fine. I think that does, but we can get there a lot faster, you know, especially if we're, I don't like wasting time on technique. I don't. It's not it's not conducive to feeling like we're getting somewhere, right? It just takes too long to get to that point, right? Especially if someone takes something hesitant and then they try to learn it, and then it slowly makes its way into something more fluid and more of a flow state, right? To where they feel confident doing something. But like, we talk, who posted it? Something about feedback the other day. I saw. So like, if you create too much, then as coaches we sit there and go, oh, you need to, like, this is really close, this is what we want, now we start to kind of break it down even more and more, and I'm guilty of it. I was straight up guilty of it. that I feel like it actually causes problems. And lifters have straight up told me, I don't want cues. Cool. I won't give you any. Right. And if we do something, it's more of like, I'm not going to explain it in a way of a cue. I'm going to explain, hey, like, this is just what I want you to do. Just try this.
Right.
Just to make sure that we're on the same page, that this is not meant to be a, you know, a paralysis by analysis type approach. Right. I want to just go with it and let's see what happens. Right. So see how you organize. So, and
Right.
then that's part of it. So, and then, you know, what that does too, and I'll circle it back to the communication stuff, is like, what that does is it creates consistency, right? For the most part, a lot more consistency than someone being hesitant, worrying about if this cue is right or whatever. Because guess what? If they don't get the cue right, guess where they go? They go to the internet. They start watching videos. They start talking to people. Hey, you know, I'm, you know, working on this, right? And it's no shot to the coach or anything like that, but like it does, it happens. The people talk in the gym. Okay. Or they go home and they watch a YouTube video on it. Oh, so and so said this, right? We've confirmed that people say similar things, right? That may convey the same topic, but they say it in different ways. And sometimes it works where it's like a lifter's like, oh, I listened to this video and it worked. This is what it clicked. And it's like, okay, cool, that's fine. But like, if I'm not sitting there worried about like talking about a specific cue, right? I'm like, I'm just talking about like just a movement, right? As if it was any other sport, right? I mean, think of all of any other sport you ever played. Like, hey, go do this, you know, dribble, shoot drill, right? Go kick the soccer ball all the way over to the cone. Don't kick it too hard. Like, there's no, it's not
Right.
like, you know, like we're not doing anything. It's still a sport at the end of the day. We're still athletes.
Well, it's funny that you say that. It really makes me like relate because with like I play like the bass and the guitar, and I never learned from like learning like I learned basic scales, whatever. I didn't learn just by like oh my god, like this is like I never took like a formal like guitar course. I just watched like guitars and I listened to like how they played, and then I just tried to emulate it. And I
Yep.
sucked when I started, but now I can listen to learn a song in 10 minutes.
Yeah, and that's that. If you're sitting there trying to work on every key and note and being able to do like, it's going to take you twice as long.
Yeah. It's also just not going to be fun. It's going to suck the joy out of it. And you're just going to be over analyzing like everything, like, oh, what scale is that? Whatever. Like, and
Exactly.
like, and you stop playing music. You stop like actually like having a rhythm and having a feel and having emotion. And I think
Yeah.
that's really what, what you're getting at here with the lifting is that when you get out of touch with just what we're all just trying to do, make our technique feel good, put ourselves in a strong, repeatable position to execute at a high level, you you are not going to execute well. You're going to have inconsistency because you're just thinking, like, and instead of just listening and feeling, and then just being like, oh, that felt really, really good. Oh, okay, well, on video that looked like that. Okay, cool. Well, I don't really care how that looked, anyways, because it felt really strong.
So let's take it even further. Like, just let's use your music as an analogy, right? Your music is like, okay, you listen to the song, right? You listen to the song itself. You
That's
know
always step number one.
that you know the rhythm. Boom, you got it. Like you can hear it in your own head. You can hear it in your head, right? And you go in guitar, whatever, and you're just like you're just going to that rhythm, right? And outside of that, okay, maybe there's a little bit of like, being able to adjust for the the notes and keys and all that kind of stuff, right? I'm out of my element here, but nonetheless, like at the end of the day, you know what that rhythm is, right? And some of the other stuff, yeah, maybe it's like, okay, when do I switch? When do I, all that kind of stuff. And it's that's why it's very hard to learn, and takes a long time to really practice it and be good at it. And that's okay because it's down to like the nuance of how you, right, how you change your hand and your position on the guitar and strumming at the same time, right? But at the end of the day, that rhythm upholds itself, right? That's the flow state you're looking for. Outside of that, you've got, another thing going on with it. And let's look at powerlifting. Powerlifting's the same. Like at the end of the day, your flow state needs to uphold. Like a squat's got to be a squat, a bench got to be a bench, a deadlift's got to be a deadlift, right? At the end of the day, it has to. because when the chips are down, that's all you got,
Right.
right?
No musicians thinking about, oh, I'm playing E A B B flat F. Nope, they're just moving. They're just doing what they've always done. It's a motor pattern. You're
Yeah,
just used to it, and that's the same thing with technique.
absolutely. So like it's yeah, I mean, and that what like I said, it comes down to having this base, this fundamental like idea that it needs to be a flow state. The more and that comes in, that ties into the whole like the psychological aspect of it, of being nervous and things getting in our way of being able to execute the way we want to execute, right? And Matt Gary said this to me long ago when I first met him at SSPT, is like, trust your process or trust the process, right? Because that's all you have at the end of the day. And like there needs to be a sense of like that natural movement that has to exist, that natural organization. And there's things that happen. There's like fundamental things that occur. If your bar is off the midfoot in a squat, it's going to find midfoot somewhere along
Yep.
the way. It's going to, and it'll throw your body around to figure it out. It does not care, right? You can try to fight it all you want, and maybe you can get away with it, sure, up to a point. But if you're looking to be the best squatter for you, it has to be a rhythm. And then from there, your variables come into play. Your training variables, your recovery, your intensity, your volume, your frequency, your stress levels, all of that comes into play, right? In that, it builds up to that moment, and then whatever that moment tells us happens. Now, granted, some people have those like, oh, the dreaded misgrooves. And, that's just them getting in their head, getting nervous about
Right.
it. More often than not, oh, I didn't set my feet wide enough on the squat. Like, okay, cool. You just rushed your setup and you're worried about 10 other different things versus taking your time.
Worried about what happens is they get worried about the outcome, not the process.
Correct. Exactly. Again, it boiling down to that. But again, like we have to have that consistency. And that's where it comes into the feedback aspect of it, and why I ask, like, why one, I don't harp on as much on the technique side of things. And I'll just straight ask questions about it because I'm curious, right? Did this day feel good? Did this day not feel good? Oh, I feel better on my secondary day than my primary day. Okay, let's figure out why, right? Okay, maybe we theorize, okay, you have an extra rest day from primary to secondary. Or because the primary is heavier, maybe that's what's making the secondary feel good. So push the
Right.
secondary intensity up and see if that carries you down, especially if you're feeling recovered but not strong. Right. Or, oh, hey, we have a little bit more volume, or we have a belt squat on that day. And it makes me feel a little bit more squattier after my primary session going into my secondary. And my secondary feels really good. I get a lot more pop out of my squat. Right. And then now we can formulate, okay, what does the secondary day need to look like for the primary if we're trying to line the primary up with a specific competition day? Or try to keep it close so that we can fudge it, as we get closer to the competition. Or if we don't care, okay, cool. Make the secondary day your primary day.
Right.
You know,
I,
um,
I was talking with Kelly Mann about that, and she was actually saying that like if a secondary day just ends up feeling stronger than like a primary day, she just moves like the top set there. Usually. But I think what you said there though is like understanding like why like the athlete like doesn't need to like understand and because like that's our jobs, but we do need to be able to identify those trends. I also think it's just the best powerlifters tend to be really introspective with their training and what corresponds to good performances and bad performances. What changes make sense based off of X, Y, and Z. And like I'm still testing this theory. For example, I always think about my training. I'm a coach and whatever, but I was telling Eric, I'm like, you know what? We're kind of found like my upper limit of like chest like recovery. Like we're always kind of redlining that. But like my triceps, like and I know my chest now it never fails to like grow. And I always feel very strong and poppy off my chest whenever I'm benching. But the thing for me is that like it's my triceps that sort of limit me. So I was like, well, maybe I just need more tricep volume throughout the week, since that seems to be like my muscle strength limiter. And then like with my quads, we had a period of time where I took belt squats out on my secondary day because I was like having recovery issues. But
okay.
I was over recovered actually going into my primary days because I put belt squat back in. immediately just shot back up. I just felt
Yep.
so much stronger, had that pop out of the hole again. But everybody needs to really be thinking about like what feels good, what doesn't with my training. What are some trends? Because one of the most frustrating things for me is if an athlete says, "Wow, this day sucked," and
Yep.
I tried digging, and it's like that's why it sucked. Like
Yeah.
yesterday, like my deadlift like didn't feel as good as last week, but I've had like crazy stress compared to last week. I lost a little bit of weight. So it's like, well, no shit, you're not going to feel as strong. It makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're like if your life is that like with those consistencies are all there, right? And we take things away, we make the adjustments, then yeah, it's gonna show up. Or it's just at that point where sometimes, fatigue, they play off each other. Like, you know, it's the whole idea like, oh, either somebody hurt their back in a squat and they can't squat as much anymore or whatever, and all of a sudden their bench blows up. Or like they can deadlift and the deadlift goes well, right? It's a constant game against the system, and the system is not. It can be consistent, and it can be completely and utterly not consistent. And we have to. This is the idea of feedback is to understand where we are in the current moment. That's the idea. You can take any program and apply these questions and be able to make the adjustments you need to make. Any program, like anything, small
What
off.
what are those? What are those questions then that you usually, if you're trying to like fine tune a program or main things that you need from an athlete when they're communicating to you, to know whether or not you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, 100%. And like you're gonna know. Like if you're sitting there and you're not being like you're thinking about the way that the blocks are going or whatever, right? And the athlete is not giving a whole lot of like, a whole lot of feedback. I mean, yeah, you kind of have to sit there and basically not use their feedback, right? You have to look at it from your perspective as a coach. But I mean, no, fundamentally, if a client wants to get the most out of the training, they have to understand what that feedback is, right? And what feedback is expected of us or of them, and understand what the terminology is. And a lot of times, so I've we talked prior to the call, but like I changed my system around. So now I'm doing like doing a feedback sheet, which I've done in the past, but like I kind of relied heavily on communication, just like collaboration, talking with clientele, to get the information I need. And it's not, to me as a coach, it became very daunting to try to do that all the time because you're just going to get inundated with so much information, right? And even then, is it good or bad? We don't know, right? So now I'm doing like a monthly, like a weekly or not weekly, a block feedback where it breaks it down and then it allows me to probe a little bit, and I'll do a call now and sit down and talk about it. And this is, initially I was like, as a coach, like, no, this isn't going to work. Like I like, the way that I do it. But I was running into some issues, and, I wanted to make sure that, obviously we always try to get better. And so I changed it to this, and it's been a very, very helpful thing to get, to basically ask these questions, right? And explain, you might have to explain it a little bit. And as the lifter goes on, they're going to figure it out more and more and be able to give you, more efficient feedback for you to make the changes you need to make. But at the end of the day, also too, the athlete is, if we're sitting at the table trying to get better, they need to get better too on that stuff. And it's not that they're not getting better at training. Like that's easy. That's progression. That's easy. Um, it's understanding what we're asking of them and being able to sit down and look at and what we expect for them to get better, right? And to understand what feedback we're looking for to make the adjustments we need to make.
So what are those pieces of feedback then that you really need to like fine tune, programs over time?
Say that one more time. Sorry.
What are those pieces of feedback that you really need to know from your athletes that really make the biggest difference?
honestly just their honest opinions about things. Like, I'm just curious. I want to. I'll just listen. Like, explain to me what's going on. And sometimes they can clue you in, right? And like there's what are the main, like we kind of already touched on it, right? We already talked about some of the stuff like strong, not recover, or recover, not strong. Lacking pop, uh, feeling flat, all these different things. Then there's like, hey, I've had a really long, stressful day, week or whatever, and I've slept poorly for multiple days. One off day here and there is too pressed on, right? 80/20 still exists. But if they're having like rough weeks and they're, not motivated, right? Or things like that, like that's gonna play a role in how they perform. And at the end of the day, most powerlifters want to get better at the root of it. And it's hard for us to sometimes, it's kind of like, everybody has bad days and, they're stressed out or overwhelmed or whatever. At the end of the day, you want to have a good day. You want to be happy. You want to do all that kind of stuff, right? It's the same thing with training. We want to be happy. We want to do well and perform well. But like some things come into play. And so understanding where that, from the life stress stuff and the personal stress comes in, like is that really, has that been a factor? And some people can tune that out and execute. It's crazy. And some can't. And that's okay. But like understanding where that line needs to cross and when it's starting to affect performance. And I think everybody we can start to kind of get on the same page of where everything is with the training. Like I had a lifter who's like, he was, missing sessions and stuff like that. And I'm like, he was like adamant and wanting, or not adamant, but he wanted, he had a 4-day a week structure. I'm like, we're done. I'm not doing this anymore. You haven't given me we haven't done a complete block. We're going to do 3 days. Super successful now. Going well, getting stronger, feels even better with some of the lifts. And, you know, that's like, if we're going to talk about it, we're going to have some honest like feedback for each other, right? We wouldn't have, I probably wouldn't have done that, right? If you kept saying, oh no, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, I probably would have kept going in my younger days. And when I say
I think
younger,
sometimes
I'd be like,
you're
oh,
just getting your athlete like permission to make the change with like suggesting it, because I found a lot of times like athletes might think yeah, maybe this is a smart move, but it's like, oh man, this feels like a risk. Like for
could
me, a
be.
big change that like Eric and I made for my benching was just I went to 2 days a week. It was like I thought I could never get enough intensity. I was always having pec issues and shoulder issues, and I was like, I feel like we should go 2 days a week, like in my head. But like I've done 3 days a week for such a long time, and even tried 4 days a week. I was like hesitant to do it, but Eric just brought it up, and he was like, nope, I think this is like the right move. And
Yeah,
because my coach like believed that was the right choice, I had so much more faith in what he gave me. Then all of a sudden, I saw his further bench progress, and
I think
that was helpful.
I mean, I think that if an athlete's not, I'm big on like the coach taking control, right? I'm okay with that. I'm also okay with the athlete taking a little control, right? And saying, hey, like, this is what I'm feeling. You're not going to know until you do it, right? And sometimes you need that kind of 180 mindset on things, especially if it's just sucking no matter what we do, right? And just full on
Mm-hmm.
180-degree change up. Like go against your bias, right? Oh no, 4 days a week was working for us. Okay, well, I mean, great, but 3 days work too. And it's been maybe it was a minute since you did it, and like, hey, you're in the back of your mind, you're kind of thinking about it. Okay, what's it gonna hurt? Like I've made changes a week out from a meet.
I've had several experiences where I've had that with clients where lifts have been tanking, or myself, a lift has been tanking, and it's like it's one thing with like maybe just pulling back a little bit on like the intensity or on the volume, or really telling them like respect that range more. Like the low end is there for a reason. Like it's okay to take that. It's one of the biggest issues I'll see with a lot of clients too. Like is that they always think that every day needs to be this crazy strong day and a test of like your strength and basically a performance. And often if you're trying to always force that top end or whatever, you're never really going to let your body get in a rhythm with performance.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, and like, you know, um, like I said, like in terms of what I'm gonna change, I might change everything, man. I might change it up. Like what do I have to lose? If you're not, I don't want you to go backwards anymore. I mean, at worst, stay at at the same. At worst, right? Maybe on a bench, okay, 2.5 kilo regression, not the end of the world on,
Right.
I mean, obviously nobody wants a regression, but 2.5 kilos on a bench press is not uncommon, right? And even a squat might be 2.5 to 5 on a, going from a local meet to a national level meet, right? You've seen that happen more times than I can count. But like, if they're gonna struggle, I'm gonna I'm gonna change something. I'll use Marcellus as an example, right? We went into his meet. He was like end of a block. No, it's like 3 weeks out. No, not 3 weeks. I'm sorry, 5 weeks out. He goes to hit a squat, terrible, like slow, grindy, RP9 that should have been RP7. Like we're talking, and on that scale, that's like 20 kilos. It's a big
Right.
swing, right? And we were doing some stuff with intensity because we saw this like immediate kind of little boost and we ran it and it, as we got closer, it just kind of started to feel like, okay, maybe this is just how the block is going to go now. Well, it didn't go well, right? So in that, I just go, okay, screw it. We're going to go to like, we've got on a call. I asked some questions and I said, look, we're just going to pump up your volume. Like you clearly like it. Like, and you're eating, eating more, like your body just needs something. It's clearly lacking all of this, lacking this pop and stuff. So we bumped it back to 3 days a week, but did a ton of volume. We was able to squeak out a, 10.5 kilo meat PR. Right. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to what we're talking about, like sometimes you're going to have to go against the grain of what you think. And that goes for both parties involved, right? It's hard, like sometimes for a coach, we're kind of like, all right, we really want it to be this way, and that's okay. We have bias, we have biases based on what we've known and anecdotal data and all that stuff. But a lot of times, these athletes can have these off the wall curveballs that we need to do for their training to get them to feel good, and that's
Right.
okay. And all it is data. Like I had a lifter was benching, I would classify her as like an 87 to 90 kilo bench. That was it. And that was, a couple block months ago, we were closer to like 90, 92. So I'm like, okay, what's going on? Initially dropped some intensity out, bumped the volume back up, started to see it turn. Well, she competes on a Saturday. She was doing her primary work on a Monday. I was like, well, we got to get this to kind of like line up a little bit. Um, this is like 1 week out. And we were kind of starting to see when she felt good, and she was feeling good on Saturdays on this primer day. Move the primary to there because hey, she's going to compete on a Saturday. It's just going to, it has to end up being that way. And I said, if this works, I'm going to put your tertiary primer, whatever you want to call it, on Monday, and I'm going to leave your secondary exactly where it is, and I'm going to progress it going into the meet. I'm going to bump it up, right? 2.5 kilos across the board. Hit 90, hit 90 easily, had 92 in the tank. So like we clearly had, like we found it right in that moment. And
Right.
if you're stuck in your bias, like, oh, we're just going to get through it. I mean, you never figure those things out, right? Ben, and over on all accounts, you would say bench was still pretty solid, right? 2.5 kilo meat PR was definitely there. Now we have 5.
It's interesting
So
that you say that because like I have seen that too with like some tapers, like where like a lifter was like, you know, they were doing something and then like I have like a different like quote unquote primer session for like their meet day than we usually might use because like it's just something I've just seen that works a lot.
yeah,
And like I'm like, why not just try that for a block? And it's like that is like
it's key.
the secret sauce. And I like what you said is about just going against your biases. That's what Sean Mariga said on his podcast with me, where he was like, the reason why you might still be plateaued in the lift or you haven't figured it out is because you have these biases that you haven't challenged enough
Yep.
by trying something completely different.
100%.
Like it's like, we all have these general rules and guidelines because a lot of, that's a good place to start. But the
Sure.
reality about high level powerlifting and strength sport is that like this stuff is like, it's hard. I saw one reel my friend showed me about like this one guy was like, oh, powerlifting is simple. You just, he explained block periodization. I'm like, that is so not accurate. Like it is way more difficult than that. It's way more complicated. It's like maybe
Yeah,
like when if you're like a beginner, like that works just fine. You can just touch a weight and you're going to get stronger. But when
absolutely.
you get stronger, it's just like you have to like really like just try like the things that just don't make sense or shouldn't work, quote unquote, on paper. Like John Hack, which is a great example of this. Like no one would think that going RP 9.5 or 10 every single week would let him get stronger, but he gets stronger.
Exactly.
Nobody would really look at Sean Noriega, even though he has this, these crazy leverages and being like, oh yeah, 6 days a week of benching, that sounds reasonable. But like you see all these wild things, all these wonky things. I remember even like there's like a Swedish bench presser who like went from doing like a ton of like lower rep, higher intensity stuff to doing a ton of like volume, like higher reps, and that was what got his bench up like a lot more too.
Uh-huh.
You have to just be willing to try new things, and plateaus are just, I guess like how long do you like to like try something before you like know like, okay, like this just isn't working? Like how long do you need to like see that?
I start I start kind of losing interest at like a block.
Yeah,
I'm
I
kind of
think
like,
that's
all right, let's see how it fares, and then I'm like, it didn't go the way I want to.
right. And then that's like when you're like, okay, well, like then you have a conversation with your athlete and you ask them how they feel, and then based
Yep.
off of your intuition, or you're like, you know what, you've done, and we've done this over the time that we worked together.
Yep.
Well, we haven't tried this yet. Well, this sounds kind of out there and wonky, but why not? Well, let's see if it works.
Yeah, I mean, I used to say like, oh, I'm trying everything under the kitchen sink to help, and it's like it's not working, but it's like the kitchen's everything under the kitchen sink is biased,
Right.
right? Right, where it's not, and even then, like at that time, I would say that my feedback system was not what it is now. The amount of information that Marcellus and Steve have put out about how you're making your adjustments and things that you're looking for, I think has transcended powerlifting and being able to understand what it is that we need to do for an athlete to get better and to make the adjustments that we need to make. Like I said, you can take any program, any single program, and modify it as you go for an athlete and get to where it might need to be. And that's tuning. That's a tuning process, right? You're tuning to the athlete to get them to perform and execute efficiently. Obviously, there's you know background noises of stressors and things like that, but I'm sorry, like you can't go and you can't comfortably sit in a chair. Any human being can't comfortably sit in a chair and go tell a lifter to do X, Y, and Z to manage their outside variables. I mean, outside of like habits, but like stress, things like that, like personal stress, life stress, like that stuff happens, and it's going to come at you without recourse. And some people are really good at managing it, and it doesn't bother things, but some can't. And you can't sit there and go, "Well, you need to do X, Y, and Z." No, you can teach them how to like, get their, maybe they hire a nutrition person for more accountability. Like there's things that you can do to help them with substance with stuff. Don't get me wrong, right? And you can tell them that. But at the same time, like their progress still might be slower if they're not optimized across the board. We're not Olympic athletes, and none of our lifters are Olympic athletes. They don't live and breathe and do this every single day, right? They're not, spending the money that Derrick Henry spends on his body to recover for the NFL,
Right.
right? It's like $240,000 a year, right? We're not doing that, right? Lifters are gonna go out and eat Chipotle. Like, is that like the most optimized meal? Probably not, right? But it's damn good, you
Right.
know. So more often than not, like we use feedback to deal with the things as a coach that we can control within the system that we can control, right? And outside of that, um we try to have conversations that are beneficial to them, improving things in the grand scheme of things. But um yeah, I've got lifters that don't follow nutrition very well, and they still do great. Like they still make progress. So like I'm not as much into like forcing someone to do or talking to someone and really encouraging them to ultimately do something different. I mean, don't get me wrong, like good habits are good habits. I'm in the game of consistency. And that's what we are. That's all the feedback is like what is being consistent? What can we learn from this consistency, whether it's benefiting, is the training consistency benefiting us? Is it going well or is it not going well? And what in that consistency it can we attribute that to? Is it the intensity, the frequency, the volume, all of that?
Right.
And that's what communication is, right? That's what we're talking about.
I think that's a great way to end things off. So, Brad, thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, man.
It's always really cool, like seeing like that your thought processes on this stuff. Will you be in Raw Nationals in Salt Lake City?
Yes.
I'll see you
Yes.
there because I live here, so that would be
Oh,
fun.
you're in Salt Lake?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, shit. I thought you were in the.
yeah,
Why did I think you were in some other state? Like Southern.
yeah,
I knew West, but I didn't know where.
yeah. I know I'm in Utah, so I'll see you
Oh,
there,
okay.
which will be exciting.
Cool.
If you are you taking any new athletes by any chance, or are you in that nationals grind where it's like, nope,
I'm kind of waiting till Nationals finishes out
yeah,
and going through that, whatever happens, everybody things change,
right,
motivations change, things like that happen. So I'm kind of like, a little bit of a holding pattern, kind of deal.
yeah.
I mean, it can't hurt to talk to me and just see where things are. But
Probably,
yeah,
I'll include your details in the show notes, regardless if people
cool. I appreciate it.
want to inquire and build up your wait list. But
Yeah.
again, thank you guys for listening to the podcast. I'll talk to you guys in
Yeah.
the next one.